Shmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Srila Gurudev ki jai. Nityalpa Vishnu Vishnupara Shatarashata Shmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nityalpa Vishnu Vishnupara Shatarashata Shmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nityalpa Vishnu Vishnupara Shatarashata Shmad Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nityal Pravishtam Vishnupara Shatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada ki jai. Nityal Pravishta Bhāgavata-pravāha Goksharas Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Nityal Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Shri Rupanu Gauriya Guru Varga ki jai. Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Patadasha Gunath Shara Gosai Prabhu ki jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki jai. Namachar Shri Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj ki jai. Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund ki jai. Shri Amuna Devi Ganga Devi ki jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. Shri Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Purnamasi Yoga Maya ki jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shinitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Gaur. Dandavat Pranams. I'm pretty late today. Dandavat Pranams are Shri Mataji, Gargaraji, Madhavi Didi, Haribo. Alright, let me share my screen with you. And we're reading from this book, Bhāgavata-pravāha. And today's reading will be short, so I don't think it's too much of a problem that I'm starting 10 minutes late today. The fifth canto corresponds to the lotus navel of the Supreme Lord. In this canto, Shukadeva Goswami continues the topics of Visarga, of creation, and describes the dynasty of Priyavrata, the other son of Manu. We just read the dynasty of Uttanapad, and now Priyavrata. Priyavrata's dynasty consists of several notable personalities, like Nabhi, Lord Rishabdev, and Bharat in his 3 lives as a king, a deer, and a Brahman. All these episodes culminate in the glorification of bhakti. The latter half of this canto discusses sthanam, the positioning of various planetary systems within the structure of the universe for the inhabitation of various living entities. The canto concludes with a description of various hellish planets. The full majesty and grandeur of God's creation is far beyond the grasp of our biological and technological eye. It is therefore recommended that one faithfully adhere to the teachings of the scriptures to make sense of one's existence without getting lost in space. Without getting lost in space. I'm just curious if the printed book has all these same mistakes as... Yeah, it does have some of them. It's funny, he writes the and like he misses the where it should be there and he puts the where it shouldn't be, like the God's creation. But then he would say, anyways, doesn't matter. I'm a proofreader, and so that's why these little things get to me. Alright, Uttanapad's descendants up to the Prachetas ruled the kingdom of earth. Daksha, who was born as the son of the Prachetas in his second birth, went away to perform austerities, and hence there is no king to rule. Seeing no alternative, Swayambhuva Manu wanted his other son, Priyavrata, to rule. A selfless sacrifice in submission to superiors. Priyavrata had already taken to the renounced order and was performing Krishna Bhakti under the guidance of Narad Muni. Swayambhuva Manu approached him in the forest and asked him to rule the world, for he possessed all good qualities of a king. Although such an order couldn't be refused, Priyavrata couldn't welcome it, considering that being a king may divert him for bhakti. At that time, Lord Brahma descended from Satyaloka on his swan carrier, accompanied by his associates and the personified Vedas. He smiled and spoke to Priyavrata. The orders of the Supreme Lord cannot be disobeyed by anyone. Only under his order the jiva accepts various bodies and the human beings follow varnashram codes. So please accept the kingdom. Don't fear that household life will harm you. For a self-satisfied person who has conquered his senses, household life is not harmful. But for one who is not self-controlled, there is bondage even while staying in the forest. Seeking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, conquer your senses and accept the kingdom following his order. Later, you may give up household life and worship the Lord exclusively. Priyavrata respectfully agreed to follow the instructions of Brahma, who then departed. Being obedient to his superiors, he selflessly sacrificed his desire to remain in the renounced order. Swayambhuva Manu felt relieved, and with the permission of Narad, he established his son as the ruler of the earth. Priyavrata ruled the universe for thousands of years. He once became dissatisfied from the movements of the sun that submerged one half of the world in darkness, while the other half was lit. He followed the orbit of the sun god on a brilliant chariot, and thus made night into day by his yogic power. The impression of his chariot wheels created 7 islands and 7 oceans in the Bhumandal. He gave these islands to his sons to rule. Eventually, Priyavrata retired from his kingdom and resumed the path of spiritual life given by Narad Muni. God's birth in a devotee's family. Priyavrata's first son, Agnidhar, ruled Jambudvip, the middlemost island of Bhumandal. He married Purvachiti and begot 9 children, who later became the rulers of the 9 Varshas of Jambudvip. Agnidhara's first son was Nabhi, who ruled Bharatvarsha. He desired a son who was as good as Lord Vishnu, and thus he performed a sacrifice. Pleased with his devotion, Lord Vishnu appeared before him, much to the ecstasy of the assembled priests. Despite being one without a second, he granted the desired benediction, even though it was materially motivated. Lord Vishnu was born as the son of Nabhi. Nabhi named him Rishabhadev, the best of all humans. It's the name of my father. Nabhi developed deep parental affection for Rishabhadev, and eventually enthroned him as the king of Bharatvarsha. Thereafter, Nabhi and his wife Meru Devi departed to Badarik Ashram and worshipped the sages Nara Narayan there. In due course of time, they were elevated to Vaikuntha. Lord Rishabhadev married Jayanti and begot 100 sons similar to himself. Although they were all Kshatriyas by birth, 81 of them became perfectly qualified Brahmins. 9 of them became very advanced devotees called the Nava-yogendras, and 10 of them became great kshatriyas. The eldest of them was Bharat. Once Lord Rishabdev toured the world and reached Brahmavarta. There, in an assembly of Brahmins and sages, he instructed his sons as follows. Human life is not meant for sense gratification, but for divine austerity. Service to great devotees opens the door to liberation, but association of womanizers opens the doors to hell. Sense gratification leads to perpetual transmigration in the world of suffering. Especially the sexual attraction between male and female creates a double knot, and it is the basic principle of material existence. This strong knot can be slackened if one gives up. This strong knot can be slackened if one gives up the illusory conception of I and mine, aham mameti, and attains liberation by bhakti yoga. It is the great responsibility of the leaders to guide the ignorant. One should not become a leader, a guru, a father, a husband, a superior, if one cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death. Oh, that's a famous shloka. Guru nasasyat swajano nasasyat. Guru nasasyat swajano nasasyat. How does it go? Daivam natatsan napachista sasyan namo chayatya samupetta mrityam. I'm missing a line though. Anyways, you all worship your elder brother Bharat and be respectful to the Brahmins. Thereafter, Lord Rishabdev enthroned Bharat as the king, and eventually left home to tour the world. He accepted features of an avadut and performed many types of yoga, but didn't exercise any mystic powers that are automatically attained by yogis, being indifferent to such mundane feats. He wanted to teach all the yogis to not trust the restless mind, which is the root cause of lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, and fear. Fully absorbed in spiritual bliss and wandering like a madman externally, Rishabdev once entered a forest, and his body was burnt in the forest fire, liberating all the animals and birds in the forests. Interesting. Evolution and devotion. Rishabdev's eldest son was the most famous devotee king Bharat. Because of his rule, the palace where we live became known as Bharatvarsha. Did I say palace? I meant to say the place. The place where we live became known as Bharatvarsha. He affectionately ruled his citizens like a father. He performed various sacrifices with exemplary consciousness, making the oblations as pure offerings to the various limbs of Lord Vasudeva. After ruling for 10 million years in an exemplary manner, Bharat divided his inherited wealth among his sons and retired from family life. He went to Pulaha ashram and worshipped Lord Narayan by performing various austerities and developed deep emotions for the Lord. One day, after finishing his morning duties, Bharat sat down on the bank of river Gandaki and chanted his daily mantras. Meanwhile, a pregnant doe came there to drink water. She suddenly heard the frightful roar of a lion and leaped across the river in fear. Thus she had a miscarriage and died. Bharat saw the newborn fawn and lifted it out of compassion and brought it to his ashram. He began to maintain the deer as his own child. Due to attachment, affection, and attraction for the deer, he gradually became distracted in his spiritual practices and completely neglected his sadhana. Once the deer left Bharat's ashram and wandered into the forest. Bharat began lamenting for the deer. He began lamenting for the deer in illusion and separation. He spoke, "I am so negligent, like a cunning hunter. Alas, shall I see the deer again?" Eventually Bharat died, absorbed in thoughts of the deer, and consequently attained a deer a deer body in his next life. Due to his rigid bhakti in his past life, however, he could understand the cause of his deer birth. Bharat's becoming a deer was the Lord's plan to intensify his devotion. The deer Bharat regretted being so neglectful in his spiritual life and inattentive in his worship of Lord Krishna. By constant repentance, he became fully detached and again went to Pulaha ashram. Taking Paramatma as his companion, he awaited his death and finally gave up his dear body. In his next life, Bharat was born in a Brahmin family. He remembered his previous lives by the Lord's mercy. He was afraid and cautious of the association of non-devotee relatives. He always thought of Lord Krishna's lotus feet and chanted his glories within himself. To many, he seems like a madman, dull, dumb, and deaf, and thus he was named Jada Bharat. Jada Bharat's father was affectionate to him and tried to train him in Brahminical activities. But being a self-realized soul, he was beyond the necessity of learning those rituals. In due course of time, Bharat's father died, and his stepbrothers engaged him in various menial activities in agriculture. Although he was mistreated in different ways, Bharat never protested or tried to prove himself. One day, some dacoits kidnapped Jada Bharat and took him to their camp. They wanted to sacrifice him in front of a Bhadrakali to attain powers to excel in their... They wanted to sacrifice him in front of Bhadrakali to attain powers to excel in their nefarious activities. When their chief priest raised a fearsome sword to behead Jada Bharat, according to their imaginary ritual, the deity of Kali broke open. The goddess Kali jumped off the altar and beheaded all the dacoits and protected Jada Bharat, who was a great devotee. Enlightening an emperor. Once, Jada Bharat was forcefully engaged by the servants of King Rahugana to carry his palanquin. While walking, Bharat saw some ants on the path. Being compassionate to the ants, he did not want to step on them. Due to this, the palanquin was being carried very erratically. Rahugana was agitated and chastised Bharat with sharp words and threatened to punish him. Being a powerful devotee, Bharat calmly replied, "O king, your sharp words and punishments relate to this body, but I am a spirit soul. As such, none of this pertains to me. Also, material positions of being a king and a servant are temporary. Who is master and who is the servant? And who is master and who is servant when all of us are forcefully subservient to material nature? Your punishment to me will only be like beating a dead horse." Saying this, Jada Bharat continued to carry the palanquin. Rahugana was astonished to hear such profound words from apparently a simpleton. Realizing that he was in the presence of a great soul and giving up his pride of being a king, he immediately fell flat at Bharat's feet, begging for forgiveness. The king said, "Who are you? You move about covered and unknown to others. I am not afraid of Indra's thunderbolt, Shiva's trident, and Yamaraja's punishment, fire, sun, the moon, wind, or weapons. But I am afraid of offending a Brahmin. Are you a learned Brahmin wandering in disguise?" We're learning this verse by King Rahugana. Well, Srila... anyways, I don't think we got there yet, though. Anyhow. Rahugana then inquired about various philosophical and spiritual subject matters from Jada Bharat. Jad Bharat explained how the mind is the cause of entanglement in this world. He said, when the mind is absorbed in sense gratification, it brings about conditional life and suffering. But when the same mind is detached from enjoyment, sorry guys, when the same mind is detached from enjoyment, it leads to liberation. The uncontrolled mind is the greatest enemy of the living entity. One has to neglect it and conquer it with a weapon of service to the lotus feet of Guru and Krishna. One cannot realize the absolute truth by sacrifices, renunciation, Vedic study, austerities, and so on. Oh, this is another famous verse. What is it? Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo namedayana. No. This is a different one. It is also a famous one, though. It is possible only by smearing one's body with the dust of the lotus feet of great devotees. By detachment from matter and attachment to devotees, one gains the sword of knowledge by which one can cut illusion. By hearing and speaking about Krishna, one revives one's dormant Krishna consciousness and attains the Lord. Jad Bharat then revealed who he was in his past life. Previously, I was a king named Bharat. I was fully engaged in the Lord's service, but was thwarted in my goal due to affection for a deer. Thus, I became a deer in the next life. But I could remember my previous life, even in the deer body, due to my past service to the Lord. In this birth, fearing material association, I wandered about, unnoticed. Thereafter, to further enlighten King Rahugana about the importance of spiritual life, Jad Bharat spoke an allegorical story of a merchant who entered a forest, which is referring to a conditioned soul who enters the material world, and was tormented by owls, plunderers, ghosts, and so on, selfish family, society, and so on. Rahugana expressed his gratitude to Bharat for his instructions on the science of the soul. Jad Bharat continued his wanderings and eventually attains perfection. The geography of the universe. Having heard from Shukadeva Goswami about the great dynasty of King Priyavrata, Parikshit inquired, "You have spoken about the oceans and 7 islands, Dvipas, created by the rolling wheels of Priyavrata's chariot in the Pulmandal. I desire to know about them. Knowing about this intricate yet massively expansive physical universe manifested by the Lord's external energy, one can come to the platform of goodness and truly begin to appreciate and understand Lord Vasudeva." Shukadeva Goswami replied, "No one can possibly understand the extent of the Lord's material energy, even in a lifetime as long as that of Brahma. Yet I will try to describe the principal regions of this universe." Shukadev then began to describe the structure of the universe, beginning with Bhumandal. Bhumandal has 7 islands separated by 7 oceans. The middlemost island, known as Jambudvip, is round, and in it there are 9 varshas, divisions of land, separated by 8 mountain ranges that mark their boundaries, as shown in the figure below. 1 yojana equals 8 miles, or 13 kilometers. So KY is 1,000 yojanas and MY is 1,000. God. Does KY stand for kilometers? Anyhow, we will go over this in detail when we get here in the 5th canto. I remember Jayashree made a drawing of this also. Of the 9 varshas of Jambudvip, Bharatvarsha is understood to be the field of karma. The remaining 8 varshas are considered heavenly varshas, with various facilities for enjoyment. To show mercy to his devotees, in each of these 9 varshas, the Supreme Lord Narayan expands himself into various forms and accepts the prayers and service of his devotees. Ila Vrita Varsha, which is in the shape of a square, is situated in the middle of Jambudvip. In the center of Ilavrata stands the golden mountain Sumeru, which is 100 kilometers high. What's KY stand for? Sorry, I need to look this up. KY. KY acronym. It says kilo years. Anyhow, I'm guessing. Whatever. Sumeru is, I'm guessing it means kilometers though. Sumeru is surrounded by other small mountains. Mount Sumeru has 9 townships of 9 demigods on its top. The celestial Ganges River descends from the causal ocean onto the top of Sumeru and divides into 4 branches, namely Sita, Chakshu, Bhadra, Alakananda, flowing in 4 directions to meet the saltwater ocean surrounding Jambudvip, as shown below. Okay, there's Mount Sumeru. Jambudvip is this whole thing. Alakananda. There's Bhadra. Interesting. Chakshu and Sita, those are the 4 rivers. That's a very strange looking mountain though. But yeah, okay. The remaining 6 islands of Bhumandal are in the shape of circular rings separated by great oceans, as shown in the figure. These dvipas also have their varshas, separated by mountain ranges. The outermost, the 7th island, is known as Pushkaradvip, that has the Manasotara mountain in its middle. On top of this mountain, in 4 directions, there are 4 abodes that belong to Indra, Yamaraj, Varuna, and Soma. The sun god's chariot travels on the top of this mountain, going around Mount Sumeru in 1 year. Mount Loka surrounds the sum total of all inhabited area. The land beyond Mount Loka is called Aloka Varsha, the land of no light. This is the structure of Bhumandal, which is similar to a disk in the middle of this universal sphere. Anyhow, as I mentioned before, we will be going into this in more depth later on. Shukadev also described the movements of the sun, the moon, the orbits of various planets, the zodiac belt, and the 28 constellations above the moon. Above the constellations are Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the planet of the 7 sages, and Dhruvaloka. Above Dhruvaloka are Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka. Some describe the zodiac belt consisting of the stars and planets to have the form of a dolphin, Shishumara. Below the Bhumandal are 7 lower planets known as Atal, Vital, Sutal, Talatal, Mahatal, Rasatal, and Patal. In the subterranean heavens known as Bilaswarga, there are beautiful houses, gardens, and places of sense enjoyment. Daitas, Danavas, and Nagas reside and enjoy on these planets. Maya Danava, an expert artist and architect, has constructed many cities and houses there. 30,000 yojanas below Patal resides an expansion of the Supreme Lord called Ananta, or Sankarshan. The great Bhumandal is situated on one of his thousands of hoods. Below the Patal and above the Garbhodaka ocean, the hellish planets are located. Pitri Loka is also located in this region. Yamaraj, the king of the Pitris and son of the demigod, resides there. His agents, the Yamadutas, bring him all the sinful people immediately upon their... Oh, God. I think you wrote the wrong there, right? Okay. His agents, the Yamadutas, bring him all the sinful people immediately upon their death. He then judges them and sends them to suitable hells in accordance with the Supreme Lord's order. There are hundreds and thousands of hellish planets, and all the impious people must enter them. The pious people enter the heavenly planets, but both categories of people are again brought to the earth after exhausting the results of their pious and impious activities. Shukadeva Goswami described the 28 hellish planets, namely Tamishra, Andatamisra, Rorav, Kumbhipaka, Krimi Bhojana, worm food, Andakupa, and so on. All the above details of various planetary systems of the universe are shown in the figure below. Thus, Shukadeva Goswami described the structure of this material universe, all of which constitute the Virat Rup, the gross material universal form of the Supreme Lord. Done! So this is what we'll be covering in our reading. It's mainly Bharat's 3 births and the universe. The hellish planets is such a fun thing. It's such a fun part of Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay. Alright. So I'll end now. It's going to be one of the shortest readings we've ever had. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Jai Shishi Guru Gaurāṅga Darśana Giridhari Shishi Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai. Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai. Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Srila Gurudev Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashatashmad. Sorry guys, I spaced out for a second. Let me just... Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Bhāgavata Srila Gaurāṅga Prabhuji Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Nitil Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Rupano Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatan Pata Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Patadash Raghunath Shrada Gosai Prabhu Ki Jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda Ki Jai. Namachay Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradakta Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund Ki Jai. Shri Amuna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Purnamasi Yoga Maya Ki Jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samagata Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavashacha Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Satyavataya Namo Namaha. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Dandavat pranams Mantramurti Mataji and Pradyumna Prabhu and Seshwari Mataji and Madhavi Didi, Gargaraj and everybody else who's watching. Dandavat pranams. Hari Bol. And I don't know if I'm going to check in with Indira Mataji because I wanted to give her some time to catch up. She got pretty behind. So I might start the 5th canto tomorrow. It depends on her really. So we'll just see. If I don't start the 5th canto tomorrow, then I'll read something else tomorrow. But we'll just see. All right, Hari Bol.